we're joined in Philadelphia by the longtime journalist and member of the National Association of Black Journalists, Marc Lamont Hill. He's host of Upfront on Al Jazeera English and a nightly YouTube show called Night School. Also professor of anthropology and urban education at the City University of New York Graduate Center, and the co-author of Except for Palestine, The Limits of Progressive Politics, and author of We Still Here, Pandemic, Policing, Protest, and Possibility. Marc, welcome to Democracy Now! Can you start off by responding to this opening of the joint questioning by 3 Black NABJ members, that's Black journalists, of President Trump?
Good morning, Amy. It's good to see you. Always good to be here. I wish I could say I was shocked or disappointed. This is exactly what Donald Trump does. He came in to the room. He was disrespectful. He was condescending. He steamrolled the interview. This was an opportunity for him to make a presentation to Black journalists and to Black voters. And instead, he was nasty. He was vile. He demonstrated all the misogynistic and racist and patriarchal sensibilities that we would expect from Donald Trump. And of course, he spent a lot of that time simply lying. To say that NABJ was 35 minutes late to start, not only kind of play, and that the equipment doesn't work, plays on this idea that, the Black journalists can't get it together, that Black people show up late, and that the stuff doesn't work. When in fact, as you pointed out, it started late because Donald Trump was resisting the idea of being fact-checked. He was resisting the idea that people could actually hold him accountable for the things that he says that are not true. Because if you do that, then he has to explain how he's spreading such inaccurate information about people on the other side of the border taking Black jobs or misrepresenting his contributions to HBCUs and all the other things that he says makes him the greatest president for Black people since Abraham Lincoln.
I want to go more to what Trump said when being questioned about Kamala Harris. This is ABC News' Rachel Scott.
Some of your own supporters, including Republicans on Capitol Hill, have labeled Vice President Kamala Harris, who is the first Black and Asian American woman to serve as vice president and be on a major party ticket, as a DEI hire. Is that acceptable language to you? And will you tell those Republicans and those supporters to stop it?
How do you define DEI? Go ahead. How do you define
diversity, equity, inclusion?
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Is that what your definition?
That is
give me a
literally
definition
the words
then. Would you give me a definition
DEI.
of that? Give me a definition.
Sir, I'm asking you a question, a very direct question.
Define it for me if you would.
I just defined it, sir. Do you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is only on the ticket because she is a Black woman?
Well, I can say no. I think it's maybe a little bit different. So I've known her a long time indirectly, not directly very much, and she was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was Black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn Black, and now she wants to be known as Black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she Black?
She has always identified as a Black woman. She went to a historically Black college.
I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't, because she was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn, and she became a Black person.
Just to be
Marc Lamont Hill. By the way, we were really focusing on playing Rachel Scott and the other journalists' questions because I think they were very significant, especially as Rachel Scott continued to follow up and continued to be attacked by President Trump.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the fascinating things is you have to watch it 2 or 3 times, that interview, to actually hear some of the pushback and to hear some of the follow-ups, because Donald Trump simply steamrolled. He yelled over them. He talked over them. He ignored them. He basically filibustered. They had 36 minutes, and he may have answered substantively 3 or 4 questions because of how he responded. But specifically with regard to the Kamala Harris thing, Donald Trump did several moves that are just, textbook Trump. First thing he does is when he's presented with a question that he doesn't understand, he presents it back to the questioner as if they don't understand it. He did the same thing to Laura Ingraham the other day when she asked about his pronouns and gender fluidity. He says, well, what are pronouns? What do you think about pronouns? Because he doesn't actually understand. He doesn't actually understand what DEI is, but he understands that it's often used as a kind of racist trope against Black people to suggest that they're unqualified for the things that they get. What he could have said is, of course she's qualified. And he doesn't even have to address the DEI part of it. Just say she's qualified. I disagree with her. She's my opponent. But that would be too decent. Instead, he attacks fundamentally her racial identity. He says that she used to be something else and now she just became Black. That's simply untrue. Kamala Harris grew up with a very clear identity, both of her Indian American mother, but also of her Jamaican father. She is Black. She's indisputably Black. We could have lineage questions about whether she's African American or not, but she's certainly Black. Black is a diasporic identity. She went to Howard University and HBCU. She pledged a historically Black sorority, the first, Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. She was a member of BALSA in law school. When I met Kamala Harris 20 years ago at BET, we were doing Hip Hop versus America. I mean, at every moment, whether she's doing Tavis Smiley's State of the Black Union or whether she's advocating for Black people, she's very clearly and indisputably Black, and she's always identified as such. I disagree with her profoundly on issues. I'm not saying that we share the same political ideology, but she's certainly Black. But this is an attempt by Donald Trump to create a wedge between Kamala Harris and Black voters. And there's a slice of Black voters who are looking for a reason, and a slice of white voters who are looking for a reason not to vote for Kamala Harris, and he's just trying to give it to them.
I want to go to Semaphor's Kadia Goba questioning Donald Trump at the NABJ convention as part of this on-stage interview.
So Sonia Massey, someone from Illinois, an unarmed Black woman, was shot the other day in her home by a deputy sheriff. The deputy has since been charged with murder. You said police would get immunity from prosecution if you win. Why should someone like that officer have immunity, in your opinion?
Immunity?
Immunity.
I don't know the exact case, but I saw something, and it didn't look good to me. It didn't look good to me. Are you talking with the water, right?
Yeah. Well, police unions are not backing this person either.
Okay.
But again, why would?
Are they going to be charging the officer? I guess they're charging the officer.
So why should he receive immunity?
Well, he might not. I mean, it depends. It depends on what happens.
Marc Lamont Hill, your response. Of course, he's talking about, or Kadia is raising the issue of the police killing of Sonia Massey. The police officer has been charged with first-degree murder. Ben Crump and the family are calling for the resignation of the deputy, the sheriff, the chief of that area of Illinois. It's just a few hours from Chicago, where the Democratic convention will be held.
Yeah. Donald Trump had an opportunity here to actually address a Black audience with a substantive answer. First, he showed up saying, I don't know the story. I mean, can you imagine, showing up to a convention of Black journalists and addressing the needs and interests of Black people and not being read in, not being informed on the most important, perhaps, story going on and circulating in our community right now? It seemed like a no-brainer for his team if they took Black people or Black communities seriously. And when Donald Trump says, well, I saw it and it didn't look good, if you said that to me, Amy, I would presume you meant, well, yeah, it didn't look good. Those officers clearly were out of line. They shot this woman who didn't, who was defenseless. But when Donald Trump says it, I don't know what the heck he means. I suspect he meant, because he said with the water, I suspect that he was actually transmitting the misinformation, the outright lie, that she was attacking the officers with water, which would justify their use of force, but doesn't, because it didn't happen. So with Donald Trump, it's very unclear. But the fundamental question that she was asking, which I think was an important one, is if you're giving all officers immunity, then things like this will happen without any accountability. How do you reconcile wanting to give everybody immunity with incidents like this where police get it wrong? And he didn't have an answer for that. I don't think he has the intellectual capacity to understand the question, but also he doesn't have the maturity to sit there and wrestle with it. Instead, he just filibusters, talks, asks other people and misdirects. And it's really disappointing. But again, it's more evidence that Donald Trump doesn't actually have the intellectual capacity, the political sophistication, or the moral competence to be president of anything.
I want to go back to ABC News' Rachel Scott asking Trump a question.
Mr. President, I would love to ask you about January 6th. You called yourself the candidate of law and order.
Yeah.
When Time magazine asked you if you would consider pardoning all the rioters, you said, yes, absolutely.
Sure.
You called them patriots. 140 police officers were assaulted that day. Their injuries included broken bones, at least one officer lost an eye, one had 2 cracked ribs, 2 smashed spinal discs, another had a stroke. Were the people who assaulted those 140 officers, including those I just mentioned, patriots who deserve pardons?
Well, let me bring it back to modern day. Like about 5 days ago, we had an attack on the Capitol, a horrible attack on the Capitol. You saw the people that were protesting and spraying these incredible monuments, bells, lions, all these magnificent limestone and granite with red paint, red spray paint, that will never actually come off, especially in the limestone. It will never, I'm a builder, I know about this stuff. It'll never, you'll see it in 100 years from now. They viciously attacked our government. They fought with police. They fought with them much more openly than I saw on January 6th. What's going to happen to those people? What's going to happen to the people in Portland that destroyed that city?
But sir, my question is on those.
What's going to happen to the people that tried to bring
rioters who assaulted officers.
You have to
would
answer.
You pardon
What's
those
going to
people?
happen? Oh, absolutely, I would.
You would pardon those?
If they're innocent, I would pardon them.
They've been convicted.
And by the way,
Marc Lamont Hill. He's
a fascinating person. First of all, if they're innocent, I'll pardon them is the most ridiculous thing. If they're innocent, they don't need a pardon, right? But what she was asking very clearly is, how do you reconcile calling these people patriots, these people who are protesting, but they're not just protesting, they're destroying the Capitol, they're raising an insurrection, they're trying to overtake a democratic institution, ostensibly. How do you justify calling them patriots and wanting to give them pardons? He couldn't answer it. So again, as Donald Trump does, and like most people with sort of toddler levels of political maturity do, he redirected. He said, let's go to recent history 5 days ago. And he starts talking about people who are protesting a genocide. He talks about people who are challenging American imperialism. And he tries to equate the two. And even then, he doesn't offer any kind of reasonable analysis. So that's 2 things that we have to think about. One, Donald Trump refuses to hold accountable the white supremacists and the insurrectionists and all the other people who are waging war against the vulnerable in this country and who have done so in demonstrable fashion. Even people like Donald Trump who call themselves law and order presidents, people who defend the blue no matter what. He even has created space to basically indemnify the people who harm the police who he worships. But then when someone is standing up against a genocidal war, when someone is not waging war on the Capitol, he called it an attack on the Capitol. Protesting in D.C. is not an attack on the Capitol. Donald Trump would probably call the March on Washington a vicious assault on our nation's home, right? Because he sees anybody who's black or brown or standing in solidarity with oppressed people as an enemy to the state. And in an imperialist state, he's not all the way wrong. But that's exactly why we can't have someone like Donald Trump as the steward of this empire.